In the heart of northwest London, nestled among the quiet streets of Golders Green, a horrific murder in 2005 shattered the calm and shocked the nation. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that stunned the public, it was the identity of the perpetrator, Kemi Adeyoola, a 17-year-old girl from a life of privilege, the daughter of a multi-millionaire businessman. How does a young woman from wealth and opportunity descend into darkness so deep that she orchestrates and commits a calculated, violent murder? This is a story of manipulation, deceit, and a mind twisted by obsession. It is a chilling tale of how someone born into luxury could harbor such a dark, calculated desire to kill. A privileged beginning. Kemi Adeyoola was not the typical face of crime. She was born into a wealthy Nigerian British family. Her father, Bola Adeyoola, was a self-made millionaire known for his sharp business acumen and generous lifestyle. Kemi received a private education and was surrounded by comfort and resources most could only dream of. But beneath the surface of that polished life, something far more sinister was brewing. Kemi was bright, articulate, and intelligent. But she was also described by those who knew her as troubled and manipulative. From a young age, her behavior began raising red flags. She had brushes with the law and was sent to Bulwood Hall Young Offenders Institute in Essex for shoplifting. While incarcerated, Kemi's obsession with violence and control became apparent in a disturbing way. The Murder Manual. During her time behind bars, Kemi began writing an 18-page document she titled Prison and After, Making Life Count. But this wasn't a rehabilitation plan. It was a cold, meticulous blueprint for murder. In horrifying detail, she outlined how she would rob and kill a frail pensioner. She listed the equipment she'd need, like gloves, knives, and bin bags, and described how she would dismember the body, dispose of the evidence, and even frame the victim's husband for the crime. Her ultimate goal? To make £3 million. In one line, she wrote, "With your butcher's knife, remove her head. Wrap it in film to contain bleeding. Detach limbs one by one." To most, it read like the screenplay of a horror film. But to Kemi, it was a practice run. A manifesto. A promise. When questioned later, she claimed it was research for a crime novel she wanted to write. But the chilling accuracy and intent of her words suggested otherwise. The document would soon become one of the key pieces of evidence against her. Choosing her victim. And Mendel was 84 years old. A gentle, soft-spoken woman who had once been Kemi's neighbor. She lived with her husband in a modest home in Golders Green. She was frail, vulnerable, and tragically, the perfect target for someone like Kemi. On a quiet day in March 2005, Kemi entered the Mendels' home under the guise of a friendly visit. What happened next was unthinkable. Armed with a knife, she launched a savage attack, stabbing and Mendel 14 times. The brutality of the crime shocked even seasoned investigators. It was personal. It was frenzied. It was planned. Anne's lifeless body was discovered by her devastated husband. The horror of that day would never leave him. The trial. In June 2006, Kemi Adeyoola stood trial at the Old Bailey. The prosecution painted a picture of a young woman whose intelligence was weaponized for evil. They showed the murder manual, tying her writing directly to the crime. Judge Richard Hone delivered a scathing judgment. He called her a remorseless and cold-blooded killer, someone who planned murder not out of desperation or impulse, but with clear intent and calculation. He added, "You wanted to experience what it felt like to kill someone in cold blood. Possibly to write about it, but more probably to boast about it, and maybe even do it again." Kemi was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. Her father, Bola Adeyoola, publicly disowned her, saying, "She is no longer my daughter. What she did was evil. I don't even like her." A family in ruin. The Adeyoola family was devastated. For all the wealth, all the opportunity they had provided, their daughter had committed an act of pure horror. The pain was twofold, losing a loved one to a heinous crime, and the realization that the criminal was their own blood. Detective Inspector Steve Morris, who led the investigation, said at the time, This was a wicked, premeditated murder committed by a callous, devious young woman. Her use of extreme violence beggars belief. Years behind bars. As Kemi served her sentence, the media moved on. But within the walls of the prison system, her case remained infamous. She was not forgotten. Not by the public, and certainly not by Ann Mendel's grieving family. But as the years passed, questions began to surface. Had she changed? In March 2023, nearly 2 decades after the murder, Kemi appeared before the parole board for the first time. The parole board's shocking recommendation. What happened at that parole hearing stunned many. The parole board did not recommend her release. But they did recommend a significant step, that Kemi be moved to an open prison, a facility with far less security, typically reserved for prisoners nearing release. It was an unusual move for someone convicted of such a high-profile, violent crime, especially on their first parole hearing. The board defended its recommendation, stating, "We will only recommend open conditions if we believe the risk to the public has reduced sufficiently to be manageable in that setting." Their rationale was that open conditions could help test whether Kemi was truly ready for re-entry into society. It was not freedom, but it was a step closer. The Justice Secretary had the power to block the move, but chose not to. Public outrage and legal safeguards. The news triggered a wave of public concern. How could someone who had committed such a horrific crime, and written about it beforehand, be allowed any chance of reduced supervision? The Ministry of Justice issued a statement. The Independent Parole Board conducts a thorough risk assessment before recommending a transfer to open conditions. The prison service retains the ability to return offenders to closed prison at the first sign of any concern. The public was assured that her behavior would be closely monitored. Any sign of danger, and she'd be moved back into a high-security prison. Still, the unease lingered. The first step towards Kemi Adeyoola's eventual release from prison was taken when the parole board recommended that she be moved to an open prison. This was a move that many considered controversial, especially given the chilling details of the murder she had committed at the age of 17. Now, as Kemi spends her days in a less restrictive environment, questions surrounding her future, her rehabilitation, and the long-lasting impact of her crimes are more pressing than ever. The open prison decision. After being convicted of a crime that horrified the nation, Kemi Adeyoola's story seemed to be one of irrevocable darkness. Yet, in October 2023, the parole board recommended she be transferred to an open conditions prison. Open prisons are typically reserved for prisoners who have demonstrated good behavior and are considered to pose minimal risk to the public. These prisons have fewer security measures, and inmates are given more freedom. For Kemi, it meant that her time in a high-security institution might be coming to an end. The recommendation was not for her immediate release, but it was an unprecedented step for someone convicted of a premeditated murder so grisly in nature. The rationale behind the recommendation focused on Kemi's behavioral changes over the years. The parole board emphasized that the purpose of the transfer was to test Kemi's readiness for reintegration into society. They were not endorsing her release, only providing her with an opportunity to prove that she had reformed. However, this decision was not without its criticisms. Many felt that a person with Kemi's history, especially her planning of the murder and her apparent lack of remorse, should not be afforded such a chance. The parole board, however, maintained that the risk to the public had reduced sufficiently to allow for this move, albeit with strict conditions. The Secretary of State for Justice had the final say in the matter. While he could have blocked the move, he chose not to. This decision sparked heated debates across the nation. Was it too soon for someone like Kemi to be given this type of opportunity? The psychology behind the crime. To understand why Kemi Adeyoola's case is so controversial, one must delve deeper into the psychology behind her actions. Despite coming from an affluent background, Kemi's behavior was often described as troubled and manipulative. She had a history of criminal activity before the murder, and her time in prison showed no remorse for the horrific act she had committed. In fact, during her time at Bullwood Hall Young Offenders Institute, Kemi's writing went beyond a simple crime novel draft. It was a chilling testament to the dark desires that had been lurking beneath the surface for years. The murder manual she had written, which detailed in graphic detail how to kill and dispose of a victim, painted a portrait of someone who was not merely a victim of circumstance, but a person who actively sought violence as a form of control and power. Psychiatrists and psychologists who assessed Kemi over the years questioned her motivations and emotions. Was she simply a product of her upbringing, or did she harbor a deeper psychological issue? Experts pointed out that Kemi had a clear desire to feel powerful and in control, traits that may have been exacerbated by her wealth and privileged upbringing. For someone like her, murder wasn't just about financial gain, it was about asserting dominance over another person. And Mendel, the 84-year-old woman Kemi killed, became a target for Kemi's fantasies of power and control. Kemi's cold-blooded nature and her meticulous planning of the crime led many to believe that her desire for fame, notoriety, or a twisted sense of satisfaction was far stronger than any empathy for her victim. Even after being sentenced, her attitude seemed to remain one of defiance, rather than one of remorse. The impact on the Mendel family. And Mendel's family was, of course, forever scarred by the murder. The grief they experienced was unimaginable. Losing a mother, grandmother, and friend in such a brutal and senseless manner. The trauma they endured has lasted far beyond the headlines. In the years following Anne's murder, her husband, who had discovered her body, has been left to pick up the pieces of his life. The anguish of that day continues to haunt him. The idea that Kemi might one day be released from prison and allowed to live freely again fills Anne's family with dread. Would justice truly be served if someone so young, with such a horrific crime on her record, were to walk free? Kemi's case serves as a reminder of the long-lasting impact of violent crime on the families of victims. While Kemi's potential release remains uncertain, the Mendel family's pain is a constant reminder of the tragedy that can never be undone. A nation's concern and legal safeguards. The public outcry surrounding Kemi's potential release was loud and clear. Many believed that someone who had committed such a brutal murder, who had planned the crime with such chilling detail, should never be given the chance for parole, let alone a transfer to an open prison. The case raised questions about the nature of rehabilitation and whether certain crimes are simply too monstrous for redemption. The Ministry of Justice was quick to respond, emphasizing that the parole board's decision was not taken lightly. They reassured the public that any signs of inappropriate behavior or risks would result in Kemi being returned to closed prison conditions. However, the question of whether the legal system can ever truly protect the public from someone like Kemi remains unanswered. While the checks and balances in place aim to keep dangerous individuals under control, there is no guarantee that every person released from prison is fit for reintegration into society. What's next for Kemi? As Kemi's move to an open prison remains a contentious decision, one question continues to loom large: what is her future? Will she be granted parole in the coming years, or will the severity of her crime keep her behind bars for life? While Kemi's intelligence and calculated nature may have allowed her to manipulate her way into a more favorable prison setting, there are still many who believe she has not paid enough for the horror she inflicted upon Anne Mendel and her family. Only time will tell if the prison system's belief in Kemi's potential for rehabilitation is warranted, or if her release will lead to further tragedies. But for now, the story of Kemi Adeyoola remains one of the most unsettling cases of premeditated violence in recent history, a reminder that sometimes, evil comes from the most unlikely places. Lesson from the story: the dangers of privilege without empathy. Kemi Adeyoola's story serves as a powerful reminder that privilege, while offering material comfort, doesn't guarantee emotional well-being or moral integrity. Despite growing up in a wealthy family, Kemi's lack of empathy and emotional intelligence led her down a dark path. Her crime wasn't just about financial gain, it was about seeking power and control in a cold and calculated way. This teaches us that true success isn't just about accumulating wealth or status, but about cultivating kindness, empathy, and understanding towards others. Without these core values, privilege can lead to dangerous, destructive behaviors.